So I'm going to cover this topic. It would be a very brief one for different reasons. Number one, I'm not going to make it like as this typical research presentation. Rather, it would be just kind of talk to give you some hint on value chain learning. I'm sure you know this topic, or I believe you have been exposed to this topic. And so this is typically based on my project as a postdoc project with Africa Lakes. And it's been 2-3 years, but I believe the learning is still valid. And I hope I would give you some hint regarding this topic. So this is about opportunities for localization and learning, considering the renewable energy value chain. And more specifically, I'll focus more on the value chain of PV system in Ethiopia. So my talk will have this content. I'll try to give you the background, why we are interested in this project, why we are interested in this topic. And then I'll also give you some highlights regarding the solar PV system in Ethiopia. And the main focus would be to see the role of, or explore the role of public procurement and pioneer projects in learning or in building local capabilities. So you may take some lessons out of this, I believe, or if you have any questions when I'm presenting, just feel free to chime in or ask me any question, or we can have a session, I would say, at the end, if it is 1.5 hour session. So this would be the topic, but as I mentioned earlier, let me give you just a brief background on why this research is important. And so allow me to stand up. I really don't want to talk just sitting. So why we are interested in this topic, or why this topic is really important? We believe, or we know that the critical mass of population in Africa is lacking access to electricity. That's a very clear fact. And the power consumption per capita has been very low, especially in this region. And if we don't have access to the energy, if we don't have access to modern form of energy, if we don't have access to electricity, I think it's obvious that the socio-economic development would be hampered. It would be slow. So that's the challenge side, but on the opportunity side, the continent is blessed with this rich resource in terms of renewable energy resource. So we have the resource as an opportunity, but the challenge has been, we are not exploiting it. And access to electricity, access to forms of energy has been very minimal. And when it comes to utilizing this renewable energy resources, the challenge has been the technological side partly. We don't have the technology, or we have to purchase, or the technology has to be purchased. And the conventional trend has been to purchase this technology from abroad or from the developed world. And we do believe that importing and purchasing these technologies have been or has been reducing the energy poverty somehow. Even though that's the challenge again in terms of affordability, in terms of access, in terms of availability, right? But the question we wanted to address was, okay, we have been importing these technologies, could be any technology in the renewable energy sector. But did it contribute to the local capability building? We have been importing it because we didn't have the capability to develop it locally. So we have been dependent, or the continent has been dependent, right? So the question is, okay, did that importing process, or did that process of sourcing technology from abroad help the continent, help the countries to develop local capability besides addressing the energy poverty? So that kind of question needs more evidence-based answer. We have that gut feeling, okay, we did. Some of you may say it didn't contribute, or some of us may say it did contribute, but I think we really need more evidence-based answer. So that was part of the motivation that we had to conduct this research. Of course, personally, I did my research or PhD research on solar technology, on the diffusion of this technology. Why this technology couldn't diffuse? But an extension of that is, okay, if we diffuse, if we adopt this technology, does that mean we are building local capability? Does that mean we're building local industry? So that's the kind of question we had. And I believe this question can be asked in any sector. So we import technologies in the agriculture sector, we import technologies in the health sector, we import technologies in different sectors, right? As we are not developing technologies. Besides addressing the main agenda, let's say if it's energy, it's about energy access, energy poverty reduction. The main question that we have to ask is, did this process contribute to local technological capability building effort? And for that, we know countries, or specifically developing countries that are reliant on foreign technology, need to have the absorptive capacity, the adaptive capacity, the improving capacity, right? And that can happen through the learning process. That can happen through exploiting the local market. So you could see some of this research work, seminal works that are there indicating the possibility of learning. And if we take also countries, specific countries, you could see the case of China, specifically their trajectory or the development trajectory in the renewable energy sector. When they were really dependent on importation or importing technologies or purchasing technologies, they had a very clear goal of building local capabilities. They had several renewable energy projects, but at the same time, they used those projects to build local capabilities. They empowered the local private companies. They build the capacity of those companies. And when those companies are really growing, when those companies are building capabilities, then they were, taking part of the value chain. So at the end, China could manage to free herself of binding dependence on the technological capabilities of foreign companies. And that very logic, or that very, that kind of question can be asked, okay, can the same hold true for African countries? So with that motive, we were asking ourselves, can you use public procurement, which is a very common practice in developing countries? Because the government has the money, they purchase this technology, they purchase machinery, they purchase equipment, and then that is a huge investment, right? So can that opportunity, can that public procurement be used as a tool for local learning? Can that be used as a mechanism to build local industry? So we focus more on public procurement, and this is not new. Public procurement has been there, and especially in the developed world, there are specific rules and regulations when it comes to public procurement, when it comes to state investment. And the rules and regulations help not only the economic growth, but the societal benefit, environmental benefits were there. And for those of you who may not know this terminology, public procurement is the purchase or the acquisition of goods or service by public entities. specifically by state government and by state-owned companies or by government organizations. And many countries are investing a lot in renewable energy projects, as we know. And can we consider this public procurement of countries as a vehicle for learning and building local capability? So having that as clear background, we use the case of solar PV in Ethiopia because the government had announced it 2 years ago, 7 large-scale PV projects. It's a huge investment. It's a huge intervention when it comes to solar. So with that background, we tried to see how public procurement can be used as a mechanism or as a tool to build local industry. So why we focused on solar PV? For obvious reasons, the resource is there, and there's a clean energy, and obviously the government was convinced and wanted to invest in this huge or large scale projects. So again, back to the main topic. So what would be the role of public procurement in pioneer projects? Usually governments sponsor or fund pioneer projects. And can we take those projects as platform for learning? Can you use those pioneer projects as mechanisms or as tools or as an opportunity for building local industry? So we tried to explore this using the case study I told you about, and we had to consider 2 cases, very old project, very pioneer projects, solar projects, and we used those cases to see the potential of learning. So we had to conduct site visits, we had to collect data, we had to interview people, and we were there in the sites to see some of these projects. And this is in North Shoa of Ethiopia, in one of the waradas called the Manz Warada. And I will talk about this later, but my collaborator Amaha and myself were there to see how these pioneer projects in rural areas are contributing to the local industry development. And yeah, you can see a picture here when our car got stuck in the muddy field. That's the fun side of field research. So to give you again a very high level context in terms of solar PV, so diffusion is still slow, and mainly it's been on the off-grid side. We don't have that utility scale level, but solar has a long history in the country. I'll talk about this later. So what are the public projects or the public procurement, the large scale project? You can see the list here. You can see the size, 100 megawatt size, that's the minimum in each project. So it's a huge investment, and it was fully funded by the state, and they had to also look for partners in some cases, but the plan has been like that. Did I see hands up?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So please go ahead.
I think it's Anumi who would like to say something.
Sorry, that was by mistake.
Ah, we were all getting excited. So now you have to think of
Okay.
something, Anumi.
Yeah. But feel free, by the way, just to raise your hand and ask any question during the presentation. So these are the projects, the large scale project. You could see the investments. I mean, you can understand the size of this investment. You know, this is an investment that's taking place in a developing country context. Had it been in Europe or somewhere, it may not be a big deal, but here it's obviously a big deal. So you can see.
Yes. Oh, the timeline comes now. Good. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is just to show the timelines. I mean, when it comes to even the tendering process, so look, a single project takes a long period of time when it comes to ask a request for floating the tender, having the right bidders. There is a pre-qualification in the qualification phase. So the tendering process itself takes 2 years in some projects. It's taken even more, I would say. So if you're serious, I mean, if the government is considering what we talked earlier, what I mentioned earlier, you know, like what the Chinese did, it's not beyond getting, you know, this project done. You could attach a very clear goal of learning or building local industry. So by that, we can address the other goal, which is building the local industry. Getting the projects done and having access to electricity, that's fine. That's a very noble objective, but can we also build the local industry? Can we build local capability? I think that's a question that we wanted to address. And so far, this has been the kind of value chain, the highlights of it at a very high level. As you can see, technology is often sourced internationally. And if in the right, I mean, the common way is that would be against imported by local wholesalers or importers, and then they integrate it or install it, and then the end user will have it as the end. So that's like the linear, I mean, the direct line or the common approach. But there has been one case where the local assembler or a local assembly plant accessed or sourced the sales from an international supplier, and they could manage to assemble it locally, and then that's serving the local market. So that was the second approach on, well, the second, let's put it, the other experience. The common experience has been source it internationally, using wholesalers or importers, integrate it and use it or have it in the local market. But a very single case is there is an assembler that sourced the PV cells from China and other countries, and they made a module and they are distributing it and using it locally. So that's a very single case. But overall, the common practice has been like purchasing from. I hear some background.
Can somebody please? Yeah,
okay.
I think it's okay now.
So that's been like the common approach, as I mentioned. So, but there has been a recent practice of sourcing PV cells from international market and adding a value locally. So that is part of the finding that we had. So the state-owned company, previously it was owned by Metal and Engineering Corporation, and they had that specific company, it's the state-owned company, has an assembling capacity of solar PV modules. And there are a couple of companies that are also assembling systems or lanterns or home systems. Many companies are just simply importing the fully the pack, which means it could be a lantern, it could be a home system. They are just distributors. We didn't see, or we couldn't find any balance of system manufacturer. When it's a balance of system, in this case, we have batteries, we have inverters, we have charge controllers that are very critical in managing and monitoring the home system. So they are not manufactured locally. And so that is like the status when it comes to the manufacturing chain or the upstream. And the downstream, the deployment chain, almost all the solar companies are involved at different scale. Some are involved in integration or installation. Some are involved in O&M. Some are involved in providing consultancy service. And we had interviewed experts in this regard, like they shared their views. And the common view has been, yes, it is possible to localize part of the value chain of solar PV in Ethiopia. There is a potential specifically when it comes to the lower end or the downstream side. But again, the question is, will these companies be competitive? That's the question. That's a very fundamental question. Again, can we learn from other industries' experience? Like, can we use the capability built somewhere, let's say in the plastic industry, in the automotive industry, to manufacture some of the balance of systems locally? Yes, that potential is out there. But in some cases, been found like there is a lack of awareness. There is a lack of awareness. Those in the plastic industry, those in the automotive industry are not aware of the solar PV market, or at least they're not involved in it. So those questions, I mean, those views were shared by experts, and we felt it's very interesting to learn that the capability was the potential is out there, but unfortunately, we didn't see that being realized. It could be for different reasons. And we had to ask ourselves, like, okay, what happened to the pioneer projects when it comes to solar PV? And look, this table is a very interesting table, having an interesting story in it. So the first solar PV was installed 35 years ago in this country, in Ethiopia. And for some, solar seems like a decade old, maybe, or 2 decades old industry or business. But Ethiopia had the first mini grid in this country 35 years ago. And that was claimed as the first sub-Saharan PV project. Very interesting, because it has a size of 10.5 kilowatts peak, and it was doubled or upgraded to double size into 3 years. And it was a publicly funded project, and it was serving 300 households. It was established in an area called Mito. It's in the central part of Ethiopia, about 200 kilometers from Addis. And so the technology was sourced from Italy, everything was imported, and the installation was carried out by foreigners or foreign experts, and it was a typical top-down project. The government decided and implemented this project. So very interestingly, we don't have this size of microgrid PV system even after 35 years. So what happened to that project? What happened to, what did we learn out of that project? Those are the kind of questions that we asked. Okay, and do we have a very recent pioneer project in its own status? Then we considered another interesting project, which is a project of Ethio Resource Group. And that is the first private sector owned mini grid. I showed you the field visits pictures. That is where this company is installing, has installed this system. So mini grid was a mix of solar plus wind, and it has been serving close to 150 beneficiaries for households. And technology was again sourced from abroad, from Germany and China. And the installation, the local support was really minimal. It was again fully, almost fully carried out by foreign experts. And interestingly, it was a bottom-up type. There was high involvement of stakeholders. I'll tell you why this is important when it comes to learning, when it comes to building a local industry. The very project, the MITO project that was installed 35 years ago, which served those community. When there was a government transition, that specific system was demolished and looted by the community that was getting benefit from this system. It is an unfortunate fact. They were not informed, they were even misinformed that the panels were really expensive items and they were really eager, to own it privately somewhere, looting this and selling, were trying to sell it, but unfortunately, it was a lack of understanding. That was not inexpensive and that was not usable in any form. So it was just a loss for the community, a loss for the country at large. So, and an interesting overlap between the two, we found a project manager who was involved in both projects. So there is a guy who was involved in monitoring the first project or the MITO project. Now he is an owner of this, a co-owner of this private sector mini grid system. So you could see the potential of learning even by an individual. You could imagine if it could be scaled up, if it can be institutionalized. So that specific, that very person had accumulated the knowledge, of course, for himself, as he told us, like he was so eager and he was so engaged, he took the learning and the person, and of course he had to establish a company since since he left the government office. So he was involved in MITO project when he was hired by government. And then once he left the government office or the Electric Power Corporation, then he established his own company. So this is at an individual level. And he was telling us the number of engineers or the number of persons, technicians, the number of laborers involved in this could be used not only MITO project, but in the follow-up project could be used or could be used in an institutionalized manner. Some are not involved in this industry anymore, as he was telling us. Some were really desperate because they felt this energy industry is not growing. Solar was new by then, and the follow-up projects were really, really low scale or small scale projects. So, so these interesting cases, like the pioneer cases in their own status, MITO, the first project of this size, and the MANZ project, the Average MANZ project, is the first of its kind when it comes to ownership, like it's privately owned. They had several challenges. In the MITO case, as I told you, it was not institutionalized. When government transition happened, everything was left out there, including the property, which was demolished and looted. So we managed to try to explore some of the learnings from these public projects and pioneer projects. When it comes to the public project or public procurement, inputs can be again sourced locally. Let's say for those 7 projects, if the government wants to source a module locally, and there is already a local assembly, it's a matter of building the capacity of that specific plant. And then that only demands a special agreement with suppliers. Because if you source it from China, there is transportation cost, there would be losses, there would be a lot of challenge. But if you source it locally, it's not a sophisticated business or industry, it's already there. So it's a matter of upgrading a scale and use it for upcoming projects as well. So you could learn a lot in terms of the knowledge transfer, like with the partnership with suppliers and subcontracting. Very interesting case that we learned from China through the different articles. In the very early projects, the government decided the percentage of local content. Let's say if there is a project, and if there is a supply from a foreign country, they would ask that foreign company to have a local partner. So there was a requirement in the tender. There was a requirement in the overall project that they need to have local partners. That's how they build the local capabilities. So local content requirement. And through this partnership, then the learning can happen. The local actors or the local companies could take lessons. So the pioneer projects, obviously, it's learning by doing, it's learning by using, it's learning by interacting, right? As the globalist community promotes this concept of DUI learning. You learn by doing. Because that's a pioneer project, you cannot learn simply by reading articles, but you have to get involved. Let's say in the METO project, that specific person was involved as a project monitoring team, and he took some lessons out of that project and through interaction. And if you accumulate the lessons learned in an institutionalized manner, then that is the first step to build local industry. But from the overall analysis of the solar PV value chain, the deployment chain or the downstream side has huge potential for the local industry. You cannot go up to the upper stream without developing your capability, right? So the downstream side has huge potential. So you may start by engaging your companies, by engaging your institutions from the bottom or from the downward side and move to the upper side, the upper stream. That's the typical trajectory that Chinese companies followed, other countries also pursue. And the institutional setup is very, very important for this. You need to have a stable institution for coherent policy and support to the industry. As I mentioned, the very people that benefited from the project destroyed it, demolished the system. So if there was a clear policy and there was a clear regulation, there was a clear support, then you could take the lessons out of each project and make it institutionalized. That's how you can accumulate. That's how you can build up an industry. So the challenge that we observed, so the changing rules, policies, and regulations were there. At some point, the government was so eager to have more renewable energy projects. Specifically, it could be solar. We have seen that. But after a certain time, that policy is not there. Then there is a switch or a shift to a different technology or a different industry. So, those were not stable. Those policies, support mechanisms were not stable. So that was also a contributing factor for lacking institutional memory. So if you talk to the Ministry of whatever you call it now, water and electricity, then I had that encounter. I asked some of the staff there whether they knew the first pioneer projects, the solar project. I couldn't get an answer. Because either there was not documented, there was no documentation, or it could be there was no clear memory or institutional memory. So by having this established institutional memory and carefully designed policies, when you say carefully designed policy, it means the government has to make sure that there is local content, and that the local content is an input to the local industry development. And thus, the policy should encourage the involvement of local actors and the development of local industry. So for the specific case in Ethiopia, I mean, a very specific case in Ethiopia as a challenge in foreign currency. So the government often wants to have these projects because they could get loans or soft loans from IFC, from the World Bank or others. And it's unfortunate that the goal has been also to access foreign currency, one of the goals. And then the other goals are often overlooked, like the one that we are trying to address, the learning aspect of it. So those are the type of challenge that we observed. Just as a concluding remark, I think it's almost 40 minutes. So the deployment chain, specifically in the solar value and the solar PV value chain, the deployment chain has high potential. So local companies or local institutions could benefit from engaging in the deployment chain, which is the downstream side of it. It could be the installation, it could be in the commissioning, it could be in the project monitoring, it could be in the O&M, it could be in the consultation. When it comes to higher education institution, it could be in the research part. And those lessons that we learn from pioneer projects could be, institutionalized, could be accumulated, and we can use those accumulated lessons to build local capabilities. But the unfortunate fact is this possibility of getting lessons from pioneer project has been overlooked. There is less emphasis on this. And so that's why we're not documenting it. It's not structured, and it's just simply project after project. So you could, if there is a very clearly designed policy, you could ask yourself, like, okay, what did we learn from the first project? What part of the value chain could we localize? And then the next project, then you will say, we learned this, and then we're moving up in the value chain, and that is how local industry can be built. And that clearly needs a very proactive, clearly designed policy. So that's the message in terms of the policy implication. And I hope I tried to cover the topic within time, but again, I'm available to take your questions, and I would like to mention the contribution of Africa Leagues, the two AAUs, AAU in Denmark, Copenhagen, and Addis Ababa University, which is my host university. They helped us in conducting this project. It's not a finished project, unfortunately. Because of my engagement in a new role, we couldn't pursue it as we wanted, but this is something that I personally would like to engage more in the future. And a special thanks to Margaret, Rasmus, and Ed, who are really helping us in shaping our thoughts and they are giving us feedback. And for this specific research, Amma was involved as a collaborator, Dr. Amma from Addis Ababa University. And I had a couple of master's students who were involved in the research. And Antanach, who's now graduating, he also mapped the value chain of wind energy technology in Ethiopia. And a very interesting finding is that still there is a potential to engage in the lower end on the downstream side of the value chain. So thank you so much. And so